Greetings, MacNNers, and welcome to Apple versus the FBI, America Held Hostage, otherwise known as Episode 55 of the MacNN Podcast. Welcome back, MacNNers. Always a pleasure to have you with us. I'm Charles Martin. I'm the editor of MacNN, and joining us this week is the overlord of MacNN, managing editor, Mike.
Hello, everybody. I am so tired of this encryption saga, but yet I feel it will take years to fully resolve.
Yes, so we'll be talking about this for years, sadly. The good news is that I do think that the pace of developments will slow down a bit.
I don't know. I mean, Fridays seem to be the big day on all this. I mean, there's a sheriff in Florida in an unrelated case.
Oh, God. That guy.
That a bit earlier today said, yeah, golly, if Tim Cook comes in, he doesn't unlock a phone for me, I'll just lock his ass right up.
I hate to correct you, but that is not what he said. And also, that is not nearly enough swamp drawl on that, I'm afraid. Let me give you, he said, I'll jail that rascal. That's what he actually said.
Oh, that's right. I'll jail that rascal. I'm sorry. Yeah, let me tell you a secret about something, and this is peripherally related, okay?
All right.
We've had a discussion in the forums about the ebook case.
Yes.
MacNN is on record as saying that the ebook case is an injustice. But you know what? There were some things brought up in the most recent and what I think is probably the last post on the matter that is making me wonder if my point of view is actually correct on the ruling.
Well, I think that the original trial judge, I've said this before, but the original trial judge ignored some evidence that I think would have maybe not completely exonerated Apple. And in fact, actually, just for the record, MacNN has never gone on saying Apple is totally innocent here. We do think...
Yeah, that is true.
We do think there was a bit of, let's call it Steve Jobs parking in the handicap stall. We do think that went on.
There were definitely shenanigans, and we have said that.
Yeah.
William wrote the editorial about it, and I mostly agreed with him on it, but I'm thinking about it because the poster is right. The poster is the judge has to operate on the rule of law, not some other situation that is not specifically at trial at this particular moment. And they don't necessarily have to think about the bigger picture on this.
That's true. That's exactly why we're not calling for our readers to meet us in front of the Supreme Court with pitchforks and torches. You know, the matter is settled. This is as far as it goes. It doesn't go any further. You know, we can nitpick about certain things within the case, but the judgment of the court is final. That's it.
Yeah, to be clear, we're talking about the ebook case. I mean, this has gone all the way up for appeal. The Supreme Court said, no, we're not hearing it, and that's the end of that.
Right.
We're not talking about the court has ruled as a finality in the encryption case, which we're going to move on to shortly.
Yeah.
But my point is there's been a little bit of hostility in the forums about the San Bernardino encryption issue. Let's try and turn it down a little bit. Let's listen to each other. Let's talk to each other about this, because that is the only way forward on this.
Yeah. Well, and as you say, a well-stated argument can make people reconsider their positions. And I always enjoy when that happens, actually. I like that.
We have very well policed, civilized forums. We are not Reddit or any other wild place on the internet by any stretch of the imagination. And if you come in swinging saying, well, you know, I think that strawberries are bad and you're bad for liking them, you're not going to get a lot of traction no matter if your opinion is popular or not. So.
But yeah, I mean, you know, certainly we welcome people's thoughts on it. We just want decorum like the DOJ doesn't have.
I genuinely want to hear everyone's...
Yeah,
I genuinely want to hear everyone's opinion on this. I don't have to agree with everyone's opinion.
No.
Okay? I'm not going to attack you for your opinion, but I do want to hear everyone's opinion on this matter. We know, based on our own demographics, we know that if you skew more conservative, you tend to be on the Department of Justice's side. And if you skew more liberal, you tend to be on Apple's side on this. But that's not universal.
No. Not at all.
Okay, but I do want to hear calm and reasoned arguments about this. Not, you suck because you disagree with me.
Yeah.
We haven't got that, to be clear, but we have seen things like that in the past. Let's not do that. Let's not turn this into a Chicago Trump rally. Okay? Well, no, I mean, here's the thing. Everyone acted poorly on this. Every side acted poorly on this. Protests, yes. Canceling the rally was probably the best thing to do in the circumstances, just for public safety.
Yes.
So in that case, presidential candidate Trump did do the right thing in this regard. I do not tolerate his politics. I do not tolerate his message. I am conservative, but I'm concerned for my children who are not white.
Yeah. And not only that, but let's remember who's the guy who has publicly advocated for violence at his rallies.
Yeah, and I understand that, but I'm just going on today. Because that's all we can really go on,
right? To be clear about what happened, I want to make sure that people understand that there was a lot of protesters, but what caused the rally to be canceled was not anything they did other than show up. They didn't beat up Trump people. They didn't threaten Trump. They didn't make it in. There was no rally. So they didn't even get into the rally.
It is Friday at 11:24 and the crowd is still dispersing.
Yeah.
So
it was a large crowd. Let's
let things settle down a bit. Let's get a little more word on the street before we say that nobody threw any punches, because I guarantee you there were punches thrown. And I guarantee you, based on just video footage I saw, that it's both Trump supporters and non-Trump supporters. So going back to the original point, let's not do that. Let's talk about this and try and understand what everyone else is trying to say about this. Mm-hmm. And let's work out a compromise. If the FBI and the Department of Justice can't work out a compromise, then let's figure it out for them.
Well, and speaking of compromise, we'll be talking a little bit later about President Obama's fence-straddling remarks. Well, come on. That's his job. He sort of has to.
Well, we're going to have to disagree on that one. But let's play the music and roll into the first topic of the night. Let's go.
Yes, let's. All right. So let's move away from that for a while, because it's already gotten ugly. Look at that. We're going to talk about some other things first, and then we'll get around to the FBI and Apple. The first thing we want to talk about is, well, one of the main topics of last week's podcast was we haven't gotten our invite yet. Guess what?
We got it now.
Mm-hmm. Now, we weren't saying that there wasn't going to be an event. What we were saying was time is drawing near, and we had to get this invite 11 days out, or it wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
Sure enough, day 11.
Yeah, I'll take the heat for this one. I said that there's a possibility there wouldn't be an event. Nope, we're getting an event.
Yeah, but we also said very, very cleverly, I thought, was that we worked out that this wasn't going to be a huge event because none of the places where Apple ever holds big events was available. Mm-hmm. So they had to hold it in the 1,000-seat Apple Town Hall at the Cupertino headquarters. Sure enough, that's exactly what they did.
Yeah, very, very tight venue. I mean, you wouldn't think 1,000 seats is a tight venue, but when you have 2,000 people trying to cram in those seats, it makes it a little hairy.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, even our very minimal crew, when we cover these kinds of events, we have a photographer and somebody taking notes, because you can't do both. So, yeah, that's 2 people times 500 press agents from organizations all around the world. It gets tight pretty quick.
A little bit, yeah.
Particularly if, as the rumor mill suggests, we're going to get a new iPhone model out of it. We'll see.
And I think that's guaranteed at this point. I think we can pretty much expect that.
Looking at the artwork that we got, because that's how these are the tea leaves that we have to read, I have decided that there's going to be a new color. Fall red. Auburn, you might say.
Okay. The color of Apple devices has never really been a thing for me. I mean, Back in the day, the orange iMacs at one point were cheaper.
Yeah.
Because they were everywhere. They couldn't sell them. I'm like, okay, that's the same damn computer. Give me an orange one. I'll save $200 on that. No problem.
Did I ever tell you that story?
I don't believe so.
Back when the first colored iMacs started coming out, I mean, once they diversified beyond Bondi Blue, I was an Apple sales trainer for CompUSA. That's what I was doing. And so when these things rolled around, the CompUSA people would say to me, well, but we're selling, everybody wants green or blue. Everybody wants blue or green. But we've got a ton of these orange ones here, and I don't know what to do with them. And I said, I know what to do with it. You see this Epson 740 printer with the colored plastic top? All right, you take the blue ones of those and you pair them with the orange iMac, because that was the least popular color by far. Pair them with the orange iMac, call it the Florida Gator Special. Wrap it up. They're taking it. And it worked.
I bet it did.
I sent off a letter to Jobs saying if you paired these things in college colors, you would probably sell a lot of them. Jobs sent me a note, and it said this: I'm referring this to marketing. And I did. I got a letter from the head of East Coast marketing who said it was a great idea, but that the company wasn't going to do it because there was a lot of colleges whose colors they did not make.
Yes, but politely cram it. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. But he said, you go right on selling the Florida Gator combos.
The event is going to be interesting. I really dislike calling the 9-inch-ish iPad a Pro in any way.
Well, who knows? Who knows what they'll call it?
I guess it depends what makes it Pro? Well, I guess we'll find out. The previous events this time of year, like for an Apple TV, have had of the vague shape of an Apple TV in the iconography for the invitation. I have no idea what they're getting at with this time. I can't glean anything out of that at all.
I just found it very interesting that the color scheme on the invite has the two shades of silver, white, a gold color, a sort of orangey color, and a sort of reddy color. It's hard to stretch that to rose gold.
Yeah, who knows?
So, what are they getting at there? It's really hard to tell.
Well, there are analysts today calling for Apple to continue with the 5S in the lineup at a lower price point if the new SE or whatever ships, so Apple can support the lower end of the line. And they were talking, well, just sell the 5S for like $350 and you have the low end market covered. And I don't think that's going to happen.
I also don't think that'll work. Currently, the iPhone SE does sell for $100 more than that, so lowering that price would be lovely. But Apple tends to purge. If they're going to put a new one in the lineup, they usually purge the last one, the oldest one, and that would be the 5SE. Even if they kept it, it does still cost a certain amount of money. This is the biggest problem I've always had with all this talk, which pundits have always tried to get. They've been trying for years to get Apple to produce a cheap iPhone, and those two words do not go together.
Yeah, they want no part of that. And Tim Cook has historically said, well, if you want a cheap iPhone, then buy a secondhand one.
Right. But on top of that, well, and not forgetting that Apple still sells refurb phones that are even cheaper. Mm-hmm. But on top of that, there is this concept called the average selling price. And this is the weird part. Wall Street desperately wants Apple to sell a cheaper iPhone, and yet they also want the average selling price to go up.
That ASP to stay high.
How do you do that?
Yeah. I think some venues are calling for new Macs. I don't think at this venue. I think that this is going to be, I think this is phone iPad.
Well, traditionally, Apple has kept iOS announcements to iOS events. Not always, but most of the time. They keep iOS announcements to an iOS event. They may sneak in some other unrelated things. You know what would kill me? This would just kill me with laughter and pleasure, is if they came out and they said, we have a new iPad to talk about. We have some new Apple Watch accessories you're going to love. And yes, it's true, a new iPod Touch.
We've refreshed it again. Yeah, well, I think Tim's got enough on his plate. I would like this event to not delve too deeply into the encryption hearing the next day, but I'm getting a feeling we're going to get a good solid 20 minutes of that. And
I hope not.
I hope not, too.
A solid 2 minutes would be good.
We'll see what we get.
The thing is that although I'm on record as supporting Apple more or less completely in this debate, but they've made their case. In fact, we'll talk later about this, but Bruce Sewell, their lead counsel, made their case. Holy cow. So they've had an opportunity to air their side of the argument, and I think it would be a little pushy to put it in a product announcement, to just, other than to acknowledge it and move on.
I agree it would be pushy. The thing is, I don't think the scheduling is a mistake.
Well, maybe not. But the other way to go about it is to start off by saying, incidentally, our first announcement is we are double tightening super duper secret pinky ring password encrypting this phone. Let's take that.
Yeah, that might be the wrong response, though. They're already being claimed that they're operating above the law and extrajudicial and so forth, and further enhancing that security on top of something that the government says they can't get into now. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure from a PR standpoint that's their best choice. I think that will appeal to a certain segment of the market, but I think that the fence sitters are just going to say, wait a minute, this other encryption thing isn't even worked out yet, and now for some reason it's more secure and less able to get subpoenaed and broken into. No, thank you.
Yeah. No, you're right. But actually that whole line about Apple and other companies that offer encryption, like, Google, operating above the law, that all comes from one source. And that source is FBI Director James Comey.
Yeah, play the music. Let's just get it over with.
All right.
Can I start with a metaphor?
Sure.
I actually have been bouncing this back and forth between some of my advisory board here in North Springfield, Virginia.
Oh, yeah, that's right. You are so close to ground zero on this.
Yeah. Here's a situation. Let's imagine that you are a Navy vessel floating in the middle of the North Atlantic, and you on sonar, your highly secure classified sonar, by the way, here's a ship sinking. Maybe you know why I did, maybe didn't. Not really relevant to the purpose of this conversation. You then send the transmission back to the Pentagon saying, hey, we just heard this sink and here's the data. And the Pentagon says, okay, well, yeah, okay, the ship sank. And so whatever government whose ship sank now says, hey, we know you had a vessel there and we know you didn't necessarily had anything to do with this. So why don't you tell us what you discovered? And so then the Pentagon will say, okay, well, this is what we discovered. And then what happens if this government says, well, okay, well, we intercept the satellite transmission, but we can't decode it. We want all of the data. So why don't you just hand that over? Well, the ship's at sea, you would have to pull in. Well, no, but you had it transmitted to you, so why don't you just hand me the information to decode the transmission? Do you feel now, if you're coming from a security standpoint, that this is something that the U.S. military should do?
Yeah.
How is this any different than the greater good of the American public versus the greater good of the American military? What is the difference between the two?
And this is the thing, is I sincerely feel, and I didn't used to feel this way 3 weeks ago, but I now sincerely feel that certain agencies of the government believe they should be able to operate above the law, or at least the law that I have to operate under. Anyway. So, yeah, I find this a very ironic issue to talk about. But we've heard from a few more players in the debate in the last couple of days, and we wanted to talk a little bit about that. Before we get into the really ugly stuff, we've heard from President Obama on it. We've heard from Attorney General Lynch on it. And we've also heard from, interestingly, former CIA head James Woolsey. Now, the CIA and the NSA have been suspiciously quiet on this whole debate. Like it's, oh no, that's FBI. We don't want any part of this. But the former CIA head came out and basically said, Apple is generally right. Is exactly what he said. And that he was talking about that while he can imagine that maybe there is some solution that would allow them to extract the contents of the phone without breaking the encryption, that's not what the Bureau is asking for, he says. He says what the Bureau is asking for is, in fact, a backdoor. And it would compromise the security. And of course, being former CIA, he's very concerned about other governments acquiring that right as well. Because once the United States says it's okay to do, there's no stopping everybody else. Getting back to Mike's metaphor there. On the other hand, Attorney General Lynch, apparently feeling the need to get out there and publicize their position on it, went on Stephen Colbert. Excellent choice of a show with a person who's going to be able to ask tough questions. And so she stated her case, and I thought she did an excellent job stating her case, but she should have really compared notes with FBI Director Comey because she made claims that he has previously walked back. So it was like she had what Comey said 3 weeks ago, but not what he said last week.
I don't think so. I think the case in that, I think that's what her stance is on that. And realize that it's her office that filed the contentious briefing with the inflammatory language. And not Comey. Comey had nothing to do with that Department of Justice filing. This is the Department of Justice getting its knickers in a knot and trying to win hearts and minds with the court filing. And thing is Apple, I believe, is guilty of the same. I think Apple is happy to wave the "this is the right thing to do" flag, the same as the Department of Justice is happy to wrap themselves in the American flag.
Right.
I just think that the language appeals to different parts of the audience. And so while the language is inflammatory, while the Apple attorney flipped out about it, I'm not sure it's any more inflammatory than language that Apple has already used.
Well, and this is, again, just as I said a minute ago, that government agencies seem to have a completely different reality that they're operating in than other people. Likewise, lawyers tend to have a completely different reality that they operate in.
Sure.
So what they say to the press about something can be rough and tough and trash talking and, all that. But court filings are supposed to be adult time. And, are supposed to maintain, as Bruce Sewell said, a certain level of decorum, which has flown out the window, mostly from the Department of Justice, who, just to confuse matters further, they're fighting using the All Writs Act in a completely different case. The FBI San Bernardino is the FBI, and the DOJ, Department of Justice, really, really, really wants the FBI to win, and apparently can't wait because they just went flat out. And Apple's attorneys got on to a press call and just tore them a new one. But again, as far as Bruce is concerned, he's been very civil about the whole thing because he's talking about legal briefs and not what he said in the press, which was pretty rough. You should look it up. We did a really nice article on it. You should look it up.
The biggest thing that the saber rattling has begun in the tech press today about is how the FBI has a backup plan and they could just get Apple's source code and encryption keys from the source like they did with LavaBit. Well, that's not the same. LavaBit doesn't have the same kind of resources that Apple has to fight the issue. With LavaBit, they literally had to cave because they had no money to defend themselves, and they really had no other choice. Apple has the money to defend themselves, and they should.
Yeah.
The FBI is saying, well, if you're not going to help us break into this, that we already screwed up this investigation so terribly, then we're just going to take what we want. It's in some kind of eminent domain claim. I just...
Talk about setting some precedents. That would set a horrifying precedent. It essentially would say that the government, or if you have something that the government wants, they can just take it.
I'm still having problems with this, and I want someone to try and explain this to me rationally. Why does anyone realistically think that there is data on this phone that the FBI needs?
Yeah, this is the point I've been making all along. My position from the get-go has been backed up by people who work for San Bernardino County. The position is that you are going to war over probably nothing, a really high percentage of nothing.
No, that you're assuming that this is actually just about the one phone, and that's not the case at all. This is just what they're hanging their hat on.
Well, yes, that's what I mean. In the FBI San Bernardino case, they just seem like they're desperate to get into this phone. But lots of other people have said, look, there's probably nothing there. And so even Director Comey had to admit there may not be anything there. So once that's stripped away, you see what they're really after. And what they're really after is they think they've got a way to skirt around the Constitution and perform what I would call extra-legal search and seizure on everything, on anything that interests them. Because once that precedent is set there, that's it. Rights don't come back once you give them up. And so that's really, I mean, at least people on the Apple side of the fence feel like this is a society-defining moment, kind of the way the civil rights movement was, which also threatened to tear the country apart.
I do. I am ex-military, and this kind of thing, this kind of, well, we need this data, so we're just going to take it from you, and we're going to make you as a company make the phone less secure so the greater good is no longer served. There is no greater good to be served by building this code to break into this phone. There is no greater good. This is not part of a larger resistance cell. And common sense tells you that they had the time to smash their personally owned phones, but they left this phone alone.
Yeah.
It's just common sense.
Yeah. And like I said, other employees have said, we can't be sure how Syed Farouk treated his work phone, but this is how it's normally handled. And normally these phones are only used for work purposes and there is nothing else on them.
I mean, you could argue that the guy was a criminal, so he didn't really concern himself with information technology best practices.
Well, clearly neither did San Bernardino Health Department.
Well,
so.
Yeah, and that's an issue too. It's just there's a lot here that no one can explain to me. And I'm not asking somebody to say, well, this is specifically what we're getting. I want somebody to give me a rational argument on what they realistically expect to get out of this phone.
Yeah.
And more contacts is not sufficient. They have this from the carrier.
Yeah, you've made this point before, and it's a brilliant one. And it comes from the carrier. I'm sure the FBI has already done the good old-fashioned police legwork of talking to everybody who these two ever met. And on top of that, and this often gets swept away, but at least Director Comey had the guts to say it, Apple has provided them with the meta information that they can provide about when were calls made, who did they email, who did they message. The content of those messages and the content of those calls isn't there, but when and who is. And they already have all this information.
Yeah, and that's conceivably you could tell me, well, we think that this information is on the phone because of this other piece of information we have here. And maybe that would start looking in another direction, but I doubt it. That's the biggest problem I'm having here.
Well, and they haven't said anything like that at all. My contention is that the FBI already knows there's nothing on this phone of any value, unless they're just dying to know what his Candy Crush high score is. There's nothing on this phone that they don't already have, or at least have a good suspicion of it. But they have been unable, both in court and in the press, to produce anything that would form a reasonable argument of why we need to go into this phone. Just being a criminal, even just being a terrorist, I'm not sure is enough. It's still a fishing expedition.
Here's the deal. If the courts rule all the way up to the Supreme Court with all the appeals that Apple needs to build this tool, Apple will build this tool.
Yeah.
But to what end?
Right.
What have we done? What happens then is that means the courts have ignored constitutional rights that Apple is afforded, and the people who work for Apple are afforded, and frankly, most of the people listening to this podcast are afforded. Mm-hmm. That means the courts and the United States government has ignored constitutional rights in the name of a security standard that we can't reach.
Yeah. There's something that ties the DOJ's rather inflammatory, let's say, brief, and that sheriff from Palatka, or wherever he was, down in Florida. And believe me, I used to live down there. Take it from me. Yeah, there's a lot of those guys there. But there's something that ties those two together, and here it is. The DOJ, in their latest brief, for the first time, actually put it on paper that one of the options they feel they have is to just seize the source code for iOS and seize Apple's what they call the electronic signature.
Yeah, we touched on this about 10 minutes ago.
But wait, that sheriff that I talked about, who's just like, if I see Tim Cook, he's going to be in jail, that boy. That is the same idea. Nobody has accused, the DOJ hasn't accused, nor has the sheriff accused anyone or any company of breaking the law, but we feel like we can just do what we want anyway.
Yeah, the thing is, the sheriff isn't even involved with Apple in the case that he's talking about anyway.
No.
He got the guys who beat this other guy to death, or whatever the case was, to unlock the phones themselves.
Yeah.
And this has nothing to do with Apple, but yet he decided he had to go out on a limb and say he was going to arrest Tim Cook if he had to. It's just...
Well, that's it. These are remarks that both of these organizations are going to regret.
So you can say, anyone can say that this is about this one phone. Fine. If you believe that, that's fine. That's up to you. I don't believe that. The FBI has said that, no, that's not the case. This will set precedent. Cyrus Vance in New York says he's got 200 phones he wants unlocked.
That number keeps growing every time we ask him.
But the conversation around this is from governmental sources is starting to get disturbing. It's starting to get extra constitutional, and it's starting to get, where is the liberty?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Where is our right to proceed through life without undue restrictions imposed upon us by law enforcement?
Yeah. And if you can't see the chilling effect that's going on here already, just imagine how much worse it's going to get if the FBI manages to find a judge who has never read the Constitution.
You know, you can call me a liberal and I will punch you in your face, because I am not one. You can call me whatever you want. You can call me a filthy conservative, and that's probably closer to the truth.
Didn't you shower earlier today? I told you to shower.
But you know what? I'm not defined by my political label. I'm an American. I'm an ex-service member, and I put my life on the line for these freedoms.
Yeah. Even though sometimes they are quite tough, that's the whole idea.
We were happy to wave them all away after September 11th, and do we have any of those back?
No.
And is this going to make this better somehow?
I was going to say, for anybody who thinks that this is just a temporary thing, I have two words for you: habeas corpus.
I'm not happy with how this is going. I'm not happy with the level of hate and discontent that this is inducing in people talking about it, which is why I had the remarks in the beginning of the podcast about let's have a civil conversation about it.
Yeah.
I do want to hear your arguments. I want you to tell me civilly and debate with me why I'm wrong. I want you to look me in the eye and tell me that, no, your freedoms aren't deteriorating and haven't been slowly being eroded for the last 17 years.
Well, at least 17 years.
I want you to look in my eye and tell me that and believe it. And tell me why, and tell me how that this is better for society, and tell me how this is better for the United States, and tell me how this is better for race relations and education and everything else that we are supposed to hold in this country as self-evident truths.
Yeah. Well, as Frank Zappa once said, if you haven't read the Constitution, you don't know how to defend it. So maybe dig that out, give it another look over. You probably, like a lot of us, haven't read it, haven't actually read it since civics class. Oh, yeah. Remember civics classes?
Do they even have them anymore?
No, they replaced.
I don't even know.
Even when I was back in school a million years ago, they were starting to replace it with social studies, which was something else. And then they just dropped it altogether. But of course, I'm so old, I can remember when they had grammar classes.
Oh, yeah.
And we learned to type on a typewriter. Oh, there we go. Talking old.
Can we talk about something else?
Let's talk about something else.
Regular listeners, I apologize for going crazy again with any of this. I do not see how this is helping the discussion. I do not see how the exchange of inflammatory words between Apple and the Department of Justice is helping. I thought that the hearing that they had on Capitol Hill was better.
Yeah.
Except for Vance. Vance was still very, very ticked off about this, and 2 congressmen were very ticked off.
Yeah, I was going to say there was a couple of congressmen who clearly weren't taking notes.
But I was very happy that it started to be a civil conversation between adults.
Yeah.
And this week, we're back to where we were.
Yeah. Well, let's hope that they recognize what's going on, or that a judge somewhere goes, and puts a foot down, and we'll have to get back to the civil side of it. And let's hope that happens soon, because, I don't want Mike's head to explode.
I think it might be too late for that, but that's okay.
Might be. But on the topic of vulnerabilities, so this group Pengu, I assume I'm pronouncing that correctly, you know my track record on this, has announced that they've come up with an iOS 9.1 jailbreak. Don't tell the FBI. And not only have they got a jailbreak for iOS 9.1, but they're also going to come out next week with a tvOS jailbreak. Now, let's back up for a second, because there's something people often forget when we talk about this, and that is that jailbreaking is legal.
Yeah, it certainly is.
Oddly enough, this is kind of a weird exception to the otherwise ironclad DCMA. That's digital...
DMCA.
Yeah.
It's the Digital Millennium Copyright Act.
That's it. I can't remember all these acronyms.
No, there's a million of them.
But the other thing I want to say about this is that my position, this is just me talking here, but my position on jailbreaking has completely swung around from where it was. My first few iPhones, I jailbroke them. This was before it was okay. I jailbroke them immediately. And the reason I did is not out of, some sort of misguided, I'm a rebel kind of position. It was more about there were some apps that weren't in the App Store back then that were intriguing or took advantage of things that Apple wouldn't allow, or were just customizing stuff, which also wasn't allowed at the time. And so I was really into it. But over time, and particularly in the last couple of years, either I smartened up, which is probably the most likely explanation, or this evil side of deliberately finding and exploiting compromises or weaknesses in iOS became a less attractive thing. But at some point, I realized that a lot of malware on all platforms is about trying to profit from them. Ransomware in particular, but there's a lot of that sort of thing going on. Identity theft, stealing numbers, all that stuff. And jailbreaking relies on finding a flaw in iOS or macOS or whatever OS and exploiting it. Now, the person who may create the jailbreak is just trying to, but I just want my system-altering app I just want to be able to play funny sounds. But that leaves a hole that more malicious actors can then take advantage of. So I'm not saying, then let's make jailbreaking illegal. Exactly the opposite. Jailbreaking is valuable, or at least the people who do the jailbreaking are valuable, because they're finding holes that Apple needs to fix. And once Apple knows these holes exist, they fix them. So that's great. But as a user, I don't see the point of jailbreaking anymore. It's too dangerous these days. It's a shame, but there's just nothing compelling enough in the unofficial stores.
Yeah.
The unofficial stores have turned into, let's face it, pirating sites. And because the center of jailbreaking is a flaw in the operating system, there are actors exploiting those flaws.
Yeah.
They're even selling kits on how to exploit these flaws. So I just feel like the party's over on that. While I don't begrudge Pengu finding the flaw and exploiting it in the way that they traditionally do, and I'm sure that somebody somewhere is going to come up with something brilliant for the 4th generation Apple TV when they are able to jailbreak it and play around with it. It's gotten too dangerous.
Yeah, given that now if you really wanted to run something, you just have to compile it in Xcode and sideload it. I think that the risks that you're taking are just too great anymore. And you're right, I would, back in the day when it was as simple as visiting a website to jailbreak jailbreak your phone. I played around with it as well, just in the interest of scientific curiosity. And I thought that the emulators available were fantastic. Yeah. And I was upset that Apple wouldn't allow the emulators on the App Store.
Right.
But as the phone became more and more a part of my life and more a data repository, it just didn't seem prudent.
Right, exactly. Even though none of at least back in the early days, none of those apps had any interest in your personal data.
Yeah.
It's still the whole idea there is we found a flaw, we're exploiting it. That means other people can find a flaw and exploit it. We've already seen malware from China come in through jailbroken apps or through pirated apps.
Yeah.
And at that point, I was like, flags up. You just can't do it anymore. I'll always look at my original first generation iPhone and the video recording app that is on it. That never existed on the App Store.
Yeah.
An ability we didn't even think that iPhone could have.
Yep, that's right.
And sure enough, the video produced by it is
It's pretty
awful.
choppy. Yeah, it's pretty bad.
But those were the Wild West days, and sometimes that's awful fun, and you remember it with great affection. But at this point, I don't know. I think if you are the kind of person who's interested in finding flaws in iOS or macOS or any other OS, that's fine.
Go work for the FBI.
Yeah. Find them, report them, or work for the FBI and help them keep it secret so that we don't know that they can't break in. The other thing about the FBI that's disappointing me is they used to have an air of mystery. What can they do? What can't they do? But now I know. It kind of took the fun out.
Well, I think, and this is just my opinion, this doesn't come from any insider knowledge. I think that tools exist to get this data off the phone, but I believe that they're risky, and I believe that the various other assorted agencies in Washington, D.C. that don't want to talk to the FBI, they don't want to reveal the existence of their tools.
Yes, particularly the CIA, I don't think. Yeah, Edward Snowden has said, and maybe he's no more credible to you than John McAfee, but they have both said the FBI could break into this if they really wanted to. It's just there's a risk, and it takes a long time.
I think Snowden is credible. I just don't care for how he executed his plan.
Well, nevertheless, on this point, I agree with you. I think he's telling us the truth.
Yeah, I do too.
And see, we got into the FBI again. One last thing about this, and then we'll let it go. And that is that President Obama was at South by Southwest and gave a speech, and he answered some questions on this. And his position seems to fall kind of in the safe zone. But I will give him points for saying two things. One, he actually mentioned Edward Snowden by name. That was surprising. And what he said was that this is where the government can't be right about this argument comes from, is because of what Snowden revealed and the mistrust that it fostered because people did not realize what was going on. And so they've become very anti-government. The other thing he said is that absolutist positions aren't doing us any good. And here's a guy who knows all about that. He went on to say that the Apple position is absolute security, unbreakable all the time, and that can't be the answer. That was his quote. There has to be some sort of middle ground where we can find. And of course, that's what Obama says. That's what he always says. I would love it if he was right. I would love it if he was right. I'm not sure he is, but I would love it if he was. And I hope that will inspire somebody, one of his employees, technically, as he's head of government, to start rethinking their approach on this. Certain people in his administration. Anyway, so President weighed in. His position largely mirrors that Mrs. Clinton has stated before. I don't know if any of the other presidential candidates have detailed what they think should happen.
I know. I mean,
I'm not sure it's worth much if they did.
Well, anything a candidate says, regardless who it is at this point, is valueless. Because when the rubber hits the road, when they have to fight with Congress, it's a whole different ballgame.
Well, that's true. And yes. So for the third week running, I will remind you, register and vote. And don't skip the congressional races. They're just as important.
Yeah, we're not telling you who to vote for, but go in eyes open. Vote for who you think is the best candidate for the country.
Yeah. That applies double for Congress because those guys affect you. The president is more of a big picture sort of killer. So anyway, moving on. Our colleague Sanjeev in Australia wrote a piece that I thought was very well done and very intriguing, which is a product that I hadn't given any thought to at all. The Galaxy Gear S2 Classic. Arguably the best smartwatch that's not an Apple Watch, right? Maybe there's a couple of people who would say there's some others, and that's fine too. But he specifically, because he wears them both.
Yeah, really, really tight too.
Yeah, I know, right?
I didn't even see it until it was pointed out by one of our commenters. Like, wow, that dude wears his watch as tight. And I look at it and, oh my God, is that watch tight? I mean, yeah, the sensor's got to be up to your skin, but man, how many layers deep is it carving in his flesh?
He really doesn't want to lose that thing, and I don't blame him.
No.
But for you Apple Watch owners in the audience, mine is on notch 3, and mine is 42 millimeter. So that should tell you all you need to know. Anyway, but I thought it was a very intriguing comparison. First of all, I was surprised to learn, maybe I'm left out of the loop here, but I was surprised to learn that the Galaxy Gear is not an Android Wear product. Mm-hmm. Didn't know that.
I did know that.
And the funny thing is that this was one of the most impressive things that Sanjeev found about it, because he said that Samsung, this is their own operating system, and they took it and they really customized it for the round design, for the watch itself and all that. So I thought, yay, all right, there you go, Samsung. That's what we like to see. The other thing that he talked about some things that he likes and dislikes about each one of them, which was another great way to go about it. But it makes me happy to see viable competitors to the Apple Watch, because competition is good and it just pushes everybody to up their game.
Yeah, I agree. The product looks very solid, and it looks solid when it shipped as well. It has suffered from in the PR battle because Samsung has tried so many smartwatches.
Well, this is, as it says, the Galaxy Gear S2. So this is, I think, the 4th or 5th version.
I believe it's the 5th.
Yeah.
I believe it's the 5th wearable since rumors started flying that Apple was going to release a watch. And then Samsung said, well, we got one right here.
They do tend to do that a bit. But yeah, so I like that. There are some distinct differences. One of the things that Sanjeev talked about, and is an important issue to him, I can't quite wrap my hand around it a bit. But I will say, very clever, point to Sanjeev and Samsung on this. The Samsung watch is always on, or in a monochrome time-only display, it is always on.
Yeah, I thought that was cool.
Yeah, I thought that was cool. There's an actual Kickstarter going on right now that borrows that idea for a case for the phone that has a monochrome LED screen on the back, or e-ink probably.
It's ink. Actually, that's the second version of their e-ink case. The first version is on Amazon as we speak.
Yeah, and that was a time display, pretty basic, not a whole lot more than that. The notifications. And this one's a little more elaborate. I thought this is actually a clever idea. So again, point to them. On the other hand, the Samsung Galaxy Gear S2 does not have that deep touch technique that Apple Watch has. Mm-hmm. And there's some other differences as well, but that was one that immediately leapt to mind that I do actually use to move around the system fairly quickly. So I like it. This is competition. This is good. That's the kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree. And that's the whole point of the argument. I think that dominance in the field is good, but I think you can get lackadaisical, and I think that you can skimp a little bit on innovation. And it does take other companies forcing the issue for innovation, I think. Yeah. And it's a good thing. It's a good thing.
Yeah, even though, like, for example, I think I prefer this squarish display that Apple chose. The fact that Samsung decided to go with round will automatically guarantee them some sales from people who prefer round. But it also made them think about how do we optimize for that.
For the round display. And that's an entirely different design challenge than a rectangular square display.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. More of that, please. All right. Oh, we got through that quick. Next up. Before we get to William Gallagher, I want to mention Scott Forstall, who hasn't been mentioned on this podcast ever, I don't
Yeah, I don't know why we're talking about this.
Well, I'll tell you why we're talking about it, because he was a very, very important person in a certain era of the Mac and iOS and all of that. I mean, he was a very key person. And so even though he got cut loose on unpleasant circumstances, he was still a freaking genius. You don't suddenly become ungenius when you leave Apple.
And now what is he doing?
Well, this is the funny thing is because he very clearly signed some sort of paper that said, I will not be talking about Apple ever when he left or something. He's had some kind of misadventures. Well, not misadventures. He's had some kind of
Adventures.
well, they are kind of wacky hijinks.
They are wacky hijinks. Yes, they are.
First, and this was my favorite thing ever, he shows up as a college student in an ad campaign. It wasn't, of course, he didn't have anything to do with it. Somebody's graphic artist stole his picture from Apple's leadership page or somewhere and stuck him in this ad for a New York community college as a college student. That's gotta feel good.
Yeah, continuing education, keep the rust off.
Also, apparently, he's one of the rare times that he has talked about something other than his current project. He said he'd been doing a lot of traveling and, going around and seeing other things. And that, of course, I'm highly, highly in favor of. The more travel you can do, the more everything you can do. There's a movie out right now, I will not name it, that talks about how ordinary people live in other countries other than the United States. You'll find it. Go see it. But anyway, Scott is now a Broadway producer. Now, this is of high interest to me because I am also a theatrical producer. I'm following Scott Forstall's footsteps. My work is on a bit of a smaller scale. Fringe producer is what I do from time to time. But Scott has produced now 2 Broadway shows. He did one last year called Fun Home. You Google it or Bing it or, DuckDuckGo it or whatever it is you use.
Or not.
And no, find out about it. It's a cool show.
Here's the thing. In the first time in MacNN history, we have in 1 week 2 articles about musical theater.
Oh, man, you stole my point. I was going to bring up that other one. But what I find amusing is that's, they were practically back to back on our page, too. In any event, so Scott produced Fun Home. He also lent some technical expertise to it. And this was a show with an all-female cast. And it did super well. It won all kinds of Tony Awards and was just generally very, very highly regarded. And so now he's working on a new show that has been written by one of the stars of The Walking Dead, and it's called Eclipsed. And this show not only has an all-female cast, it also has an all-female creative team. Wow. So Forstall and his wife actually are the producers on this. And apparently he's got really good taste in this, judging from the last one. So I'm hopeful that it'll be very successful. One show he has not produced is a musical about Steve Jobs and Bill Gates called Nerds.
I have no words because this isn't even the only one about the topic.
Yeah. I know. There's another musical about Jobs called The Crazy Ones that is actually going to debut off-Broadway. The Jobs Gates musical, Nerds, was going to go straight to Broadway from a couple of early stagings, go straight to Broadway, and one of the backers pulled out, so they're not going to do that. But apparently it was quite good. It won awards. This is the thing that kills me, though, is that show, the Nerds show, is written by Jordan Allen Dutton and Eric Weiner of the TV show Robot Chicken.
This is my excited face.
I don't know about you, but I want to see this in the worst way.
Apple as a technology company is fine as a technology company, and there are aspects of the fetishism of it that bother me a little bit. We don't need 3 Steve Jobs movies within 5 years of his death. We don't.
No.
We don't need musical theater. We just don't need these things.
I find it ironic that the most successful one was apparently the Ashton Kutcher one.
Yeah, that one actually, financially, of course, did the best out of all of them.
Did very well, yeah.
And, then there was Pirates of Silicon Valley before he was even dead.
Yeah, that was long before he was dead. That was when he was healthy and fine. He apparently even liked it after a while, although...
Well, yeah, he brought Noah Wiley out in, 1999 for a keynote speech?
Yeah. And so, even though both him and Woz acknowledged that story was just made up.
Yeah.
And that's the problem here, is I think what we're getting with these musicals and stage shows is the Spider-Manization. Hey! There's a word.
Need an origin story every 3 years?
Yeah, that's what we're getting. We're getting the Supermanification also, because they do that too, of the Jobs story, and I would like to see the original Mac posse, the Macintosh posse, try to come together and write what they think. And they sort of have on folklore.org, but to present something in a visual medium of some sort that would really tell the story, at least as closely as you can given dramatic license.
I don't know. I think William's doing a pretty good job. Maybe they should hire him.
Yeah. He's an excellent dramatist, actually.
Well, I was talking about the Apple history pieces he's doing.
Aren't those fascinating?
Oh, man. Yeah,
they are fascinating. And even I am learning stuff in this thing. I lived all this Apple history. That series has been great. If you haven't read it, it's our This Week in Apple History, and then we do a monthly summary as well. But really, the week-by-week stuff is a time-traveling slices across what happened in this week in the 80s and the 90s and the aughts. And what's funny is how many things kind of tie together in there. It's very wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey, you Doctor Who fans. You should see it.
Oh, there we go. The required Doctor Who reference.
Oh, wait, and I've got another one. Speaking of Doctor Who, something not as widely known as I would have thought is that Douglas Adams used to both write for Doctor Who and was a script editor of Doctor Who. And I met him many years ago when I was a young journalist, and he, for some reason, liked me. It was probably because I kept picking up the tab at the bar, and we got on terribly well. So I just wanted to acknowledge that he would have been 64 today.
Yeah, there you go.
For those of you who may not know who I'm talking about, he wrote a book called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It actually started off as a radio series, and there were several books that followed that. But more importantly, and particularly from the Apple perspective, he was an early and ardent Mac user.
Very loud about it, yeah.
And futurist. The guy was full of great quotes, but one of the quotes that has always stuck with me is, "The Macintosh may only have 10% of the market, but it is clearly the top 10%. Cheers, mate. And speaking of brilliant British writers, it's time for William Gallagher and the App of the Week. William, what have you got for us?
I think this is probably the most expensive App of the Week I've covered, but it's definitely also one of the most niche. Omniplan 3 for iOS is $75 in the version I've been using, or $150 for a Pro version that does add some very tempting features. Whichever version you get, it's a project management app from the makers of the OmniFocus To-Do app, the Omni Outliner outlining one, and OmniGraffle, which I know is graphics, but I still can't fully grasp. Omniplan is the nearest equivalent on the Mac to Microsoft Project, which is the standard for all project management. But Microsoft's app isn't on the Mac, and it is Microsoft. It's very Microsoft. I mean, no question, Microsoft Project is more powerful than Omniplan, but good luck using it. You have to go on courses just to understand the price of the app. I wish I was entirely kidding. Omniplan 3, well, actually, right now, it's currently handling 2 long book projects for me where I have to work with other people. It's got my schedule, it's got who's supposed to be doing what, and most importantly, when they're supposed to be doing it. And I can step back and look at this whole thing as one Gantt chart, or new to this version on iOS, a network diagram. That turns out to be a simpler graphical way of seeing where you are in your project. And it's quite handy for just shuffling things around a little bit, seeing a bit more, changing a few connections. But actually, I just like the traditional Gantt chart. You can look at that. Actually, you can look at either of these things and you can see what's been done, what's late, what's early. You can estimate that it's going to take you 5 days to do something. And then you can say, oh, but actually, no, hang on. I only work 3 days a week here. I'm working somewhere else the rest of the time. Or you can say, I've got to have next Wednesday off. It's urgent. Omniplan adjusts your project plan to take into account everyone's availability, all of the resources, and all of the time you've got. Now, it can't make your project magically work out on time, but it can show you right now that you are going to be over by a week or over by $1 million. And it can help you see where to adjust and what to drop to hit your budgets or your deadlines. Omniplan 3 is serious software, and it belongs on the iPad where you can take it to meetings, to building sites, to wherever your project is being done. And now, actually, excuse me, I'm going to take mine to a coffee shop.
Well, that just about wraps it up for episode 55, which I cannot drive, of the MacNN podcast.
I see what you did there.
This has been a weird show. We have referenced musical theater, Douglas Adams, and now Sammy Hagar.
Let me just reiterate one point. Let's talk about this. Let's keep talking about this as a site and as a public. Let's keep talking about this. Let's not throw punches. Let's keep talking about it.
Yes. Please try to show at least a little more decorum than the Department of Justice, if you would, please. Or Apple's attorney when he gets really mad.
Oh, he gets really mad. He starts swinging. Yeah, but
it was always a little bit fun, I confess, to watch any lawyer blow his stack.
yeah, I'd have faith in our readership, and I think we can have a civil conversation about this.
Oh, yeah. And the great part about it is we have a huge advantage over almost everybody involved in this debate. The FBI, the CIA, President of the United States, the candidates running for President of the United States. We have an advantage over them. We understand this technology.
Yeah.
And we can talk about it in practical terms about what actually could be done, what is realistic to be done. Because a lot of what I've heard from both sides is essentially wave a wand and talk to each other, and I'll bet you can produce a solution. And that's not always, that's an admirable goal, but it's not always the case.
Yep.
All right. So thank you so much, as always, for taking a little time out of your day to listen to our show. We are very grateful for the audience we have. And I know that I speak on behalf of William and Malcolm and the One More Thing podcast as well on that. We're going to wrap it up, but that's only because we have to get back to work, because somebody else just said something stupid and needs correcting on the internet. So we got to go. We'll be back next week with episode 56. We hope we'll see you there. Thanks very much. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Goodbye.